So the next thing up here, as you can see, is how to overcome an imposter syndrome. And I'm not gonna present everyone here. I'm just gonna present kind of the presenter. And I love how he just approached me a few moments back, and he said, "Yeah, you can just introduce me as like the fucking great guy coming out of Bulgaria." So please welcome the fucking great guy Stoyan on stage. Come on upstairs, brother. There, he's flying in. The flying Bulgarian.
How's everybody doing? All right, how's everybody doing today? All right, we're getting tired, that's fine, that's fine. So, this is my 6th time here at 15 seconds, and I keep coming back. But I do have a feeling that this session is probably going to be the most valuable and meaningful, at least I've been a part of. And the reason for that is, today we'll speak about a very important topic, the topic of how to deal with the imposter syndrome. And just to give you an idea, I have a couple of definitions. Is anybody here doesn't know what an imposter syndrome is, but you're here at the session? Okay, most of you know. Let me give you a definition. The persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own effort or skills. Right? You don't believe you deserve the success and the achievements that you've created. I want to invite you maybe for the last time today to close your eyes as you're sitting. Just close your eyes. Take a few deep breaths. And I want you to imagine the very last time that you had these feelings of insecurity. Feelings of not being good enough. Maybe you achieved something. Maybe you generated success, but you didn't believe that you deserve it. How did you feel? I want you to open your eyes, and I want you to find one person that you haven't spoken to today around you, and just share with each other, what did you just imagine? Okay? Let's go. Find one person and share with them these feelings and this situation. We have our lovely guest here at the stage right now. And let's start this session on the imposter syndrome by 30-second introduction, starting from Sam, and then going this way. 30-second introduction. I want you to emphasize when you introduce yourself on your biggest achievements. Go, 30 seconds.
So first of all, I want to say when I heard that question, we're here to talk about imposter syndrome. So the first thing that went through me was like, achievements? I don't have any achievements to share. But what I would say is some things that I'm really proud of is one is being here. It feels a real honor to be at 15 seconds to have the opportunity to share our thoughts, and we've had a few conversations with each other, and that's been wonderful. But probably what I'm most proud of is the fact that I'm able to constantly reinvent myself, and also that I go after my dreams. And I've had a bit of a backwards life in some ways, according to the traditional trajectory, where I dropped out of high school, but I still ended up being the head of marketing for Starbucks EMEA. And that's brought me on a journey of where I've tried to understand more around how to be a passionate leader, how to learn and unlearn. I've had masters from INSEAD. I'm currently doing my doctorate. And I've kind of done life backwards. But I'd say out of that, the most and the biggest achievement is the friends and the family that I have and the community that I've developed, including my new friends and older friends like Stoyan.
Okay, I feel I'm sitting next to the right person. Hi, everyone. My name is Joy Francis. I am Executive Director of Words of Colour, which is the immersive change agency, which a place where unheard stories are told. I'm a creative entrepreneur, cultural strategist. I'm also a budding DJ, photographer, and I also make films. And I feel much the same. Yes, it's about, we're here to discuss the imposter syndrome. And for me, I think my biggest achievement is yet to come. I am grateful to wake up every day doing something I choose and to work with people that inspire me and hopefully I inspire. And I'd say there's too many things to mention, but one of the things I'm incredibly proud of is being part of the media liaison team for the Hillsborough inquest, which was one of our major tragedies in the UK, a miscarriage of justice, and being there when they got the verdict after a 32-year fight. They won. So I think for me, in terms of civil rights, things like that's one of the things I'm proud of.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I agree with you. We should give a big round of applause for that.
Hi, everyone. Nina Mueller, Executive Director of Business Operations for Moodly. If you haven't seen the big Moodly sign, there's a booth over there. I heard they're pouring wine. I consider my achievement just the journey that I've been on. I started in the project management space as an insecure person who just felt like my job was budgets and timelines. And I've managed to just evolve and develop my career into a leader now who gets to make strategic decisions that have large impacts on companies and people. And I'm still on that journey, and it's pretty cool. And I'm very proud of where I've come from. And I also have a family. My achievement is my baby boy. He's almost 2. And and I'm excited to get into that because I think today's topic is going to be rooted in a lot of our experiences from where we came from and what that means to us.
Okay, thank you. My name is Abu Meyaki. I use that word service deliberately, as an enterprise transformation consultant, a leadership coach, and an educator. I educate in leadership. Leadership is something that is dear to my heart. I feel like, we're going through a bit of a drought in leadership these days. Accelerating leadership self-discovery is something that really fascinates me, as well as reinventing organizations and culture change. But in terms of what I'm most proud of is family. I have a blended family, 7 kids, and talking about imposter syndrome, trying to figure out what each child needs every single day. Yeah, you could certainly seem as like an imposter, a father, a dad. So I identify firstly as a father, as a dad, but I know that every single day I probably wear the imposter hat there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. So let's start maybe with a first question, which is, do you think everyone is having feelings of imposter syndrome? And what do you personally do to deal with that yourself when you have these feelings? Maybe let's start with Nina.
Yeah, it's a good question because just even in today's talk, I have my own feelings about what it is and how we handle it and how I've handled it, and I wanted to hear a lot of other perspectives and where it comes from, and there isn't really one answer to a lot of it. Do I think that everyone has it? I believe that everyone has a feeling, a notion of self-doubt in them that isn't talked about enough. And that's where this came from. Like, it's called a syndrome now, and that's really just like a word that somehow, I don't know who decided that's what it's called, because it was originally, it's a universal phenomenon that isn't really addressed. And every time I've had a conversation the last few weeks telling people, oh, I'm gonna be on a panel about this topic, everyone's like, oh, I have that too, And I'm like, wow, why don't we talk about this more? In terms of overcoming it, I don't know if we can ever overcome it, but I had a moment where I realized that I was maybe battling a lot of this stuff a few years ago, where I had like a panic attack before an interview, because I was like, why would anyone want to interview me? I'm so scared. I'm going to say something stupid, and all my colleagues are going to hear it, and my CEO is going to find out that I don't know anything, and that's going to be the end of it. And I had the right help and people and motivation just to like get past it. And so it's with experience, and I think that question can, like, we can just speak hours about it. Yeah. So I want to give everyone else a chance to talk, because I could just keep going deep into it. But can it be overcome? I think it is a growth story, and it is going to always, self-doubt's always going to be something that's going to come with us. It's human nature. So I don't know. I don't know yet.
I have mixed feelings. I think that sometimes we pathologize things, and I think that it's more complex, and I think that it has a home because we live in a society where competition, ego, a sense of lack, a sense of not being enough, which is fueled, as we've seen, in the rise in mental health of young people with social media, that you are living a life that's not yours. And also the fact that we live in a world which has a hierarchy of discrimination. So if you're not part of a particular culture or group or tribe, you can be made to feel you don't belong. So of course that's going to fuel ideas of the imposter syndrome, and particularly when you come from immigrant backgrounds, you don't see yourself represented, that will have a place to live, and it doesn't deserve to live with you, because actually it has nothing to do with you. So I think that we have normalized something which actually is about being human. And I think that we need to have different conversations about feeling vulnerable, feeling frail, the fact that it's not even beyond self-doubt, that anxiety actually is a part of life. You know, before things happen, you feel anxious. And I think once if you're in a position to understand it and not label it as something bad, then you will be able to manage yourself and life more. So hence why I feel it's complex.
You actually triggered something when you were speaking, where I was thinking, initially coming into this conversation, we talked about this before, that is it a syndrome? And syndrome to me implies that there's something wrong, that it's ongoing, that it needs to be fixed. And I agree with you, if we could allow that kind of darker side of ourselves, or that, and by darker I mean that stuff that we push down, that we ignore, that we don't want to show others, where if we're more open about it, we'd actually, I think, realize that we have A, more in common, but B, also we all have things that we're insecure about. And you said something else where I thought to myself, I wonder if imposter syndrome is increasing but also evolving. Yeah. And what I mean by that is to your point around social media, and I'm not blaming this all on social media, but we grow up in a society where it's all about doing more, achieving more, having more success. And I wonder if by doing that, that we're actually pushing down our own authenticity, even though we talk about it. So therefore, we are imposters because we're trying to be everybody else. And I just wondered if maybe it's time to pivot the conversation, because how do we allow for talking about those things that we feel uncomfortable about, talking about the things that we feel that we're not good enough at? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic. I think about Brenda Orland, an author who said, because there's no one like you ever created since the beginning of time, you're immeasurable, you're unique. And it's very difficult, based on what Samantha and Joy mentioned, to find your uniqueness given all the noise.
Yeah.
It really is. It's a lot of noise. And you talk about trying to go deep. A lot of the conversations on the personal growth stage have been, going deep and finding yourself within. You need to cut out the noise, but it's very, very difficult. So to your question, can it be overcome? Yes, it can, but a lot of internal work needs to happen. And you also have to be willing, really willing, to go through that, right? What is your, I shared on stage, what is your vision? What are your values? How do you align the two together to ensure that you're really pushing out what you don't see as part of your vision for yourself, even as a young person? Walk your path, but also understand and build community around you that will support you.
Yeah, unfortunately, most of the schools, high schools, colleges, and so on, we are not taught those life skills, the things that we have to talk about today. We shouldn't talk about these things at all, right? Self-awareness, imposter syndrome, time management, life skills. But because we don't talk about them, we grow up, and at some point, we have to face them. I was reading some researches and studies before, preparing here for this panel, and according to different studies, you can see different numbers, but 70, 80, 90% of people are struggling with imposter syndrome. And interestingly, women tend to struggle more. Mm-hmm. That's according to the data, to the studies. And I wonder, what do you guys think? Where is that coming from? I know some of you have something to share, but actually I want to start with the gentleman on the table first.
That's interesting. I was teaching last week, and the conversations about women in the workplace came up, and the relationship in the workplace. So the text that I was reading said, women don't negotiate as they build relationships. When they engage in a conversation, it's more to build a relationship as opposed to men who engage in a conversation to define status and then negotiate, right? So it is different, but I mean, I feel, is more of a generalization of, both sexes. I don't know. I really don't know. I'll have my esteemed colleagues, answer that.
Well, I was just going to offer, my perspective is, and I will share a moment with you. When I first started working at Starbucks, I was at a conference, and we were sitting around a table, and there was somebody I really looked up to, and I was sitting beside him, and we were asked to share something that we were really afraid of or fearful of. And he looked at me and he said, I'm really afraid that somebody's going to find out that I slipped through the cracks. And I said, what do you mean by that? And Greg looked at me and he said, I don't know that I'm good enough to be here. And I thought to myself, isn't that interesting? And I wasn't necessarily feeling that way. And it's something that I've actually been thinking a lot about, where for me, almost the more that I learn, the more that I become more insecure and more of the imposter syndrome creeps in, versus when I was younger and I didn't know any better, I didn't question that element. I just jumped in and I tried and I did things. And my point is that I think at the core of it, we're all human. And a lot of men that I talk to have the same insecurities. Yeah. They just don't have the same conversations around it.
Conversations are different.
I want to pick up on that, and I agree, because what I'm curious about is I'm aware of that type of the study, but I'm also aware, and from experience, that men are least likely to fill in surveys. Women are more likely. So that's skewed. Not only that, I think a lot of the time men and women ask different questions. And I want to reinforce that. There's a book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendrickson, I think his name is. And I started reading it, and it's interesting because what he says is that there is an almost like an upper achievement limit that we have within ourselves, that we have our own ceiling, and that when you hit that and you're successful, you then find some way subconsciously to start apologizing for it. You start sabotaging yourself. And what's interesting with the book so far, because he coaches, he's a psychologist, he coaches, but what's interesting, a lot of the case studies he's used are men and white men. And it's interesting, they go on the golf course and everything else, but he was listening to their conversations, and, even when they hit a ball, hit it quite well, oh no. So it's it's more nuanced, the language is, and they were not self-aware that they were being depreciating. It's because he had that skill set to be in the space to notice that they were insecure, but expressed it differently. So again, I think that we are dealing, I said this when we had the pre-talk, with some faulty data. I think we need to have more up-to-date information, and I think we need to have much more nuanced and smarter questions before I feel I can confidently say yes and no. But women do communicate differently, and there's nothing wrong with that. It shouldn't be put you at a disadvantage, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that women have been battling societal barriers for years. And I think the narrative of that, saying that this study that's mostly women, then projects back onto women, and then we think like, oh, it is just mostly women, and it's just like this evil circle of like what's bouncing back from like the media and what's being read, and then us. And then there's also generalization of you know, women in the workforce and in leadership that we are very good listeners, maybe. I'm not the one saying this. I've heard this, read this, and I've been told this. But because we listen so much, and we are very situational, our situational IQ, I believe, is to be quite high. We like to read the room, and therefore, we might overthink moments. We're really picking up on body language, and we're just overthinking things. And it's just this circular thing where it's like, I don't know how to react to that sometimes, but for me, I just know that what helped me was to just be brave in moments where I just couldn't, where I was so nervous and I was so scared, but I had to get through it because I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to work. I wanted to do that interview, and I wanted to be a leader. And so in that moment, I was like, I'm just gonna do my best, and I'm gonna be brave, and I'm gonna feel good about that. So let's worry less, and let's have less fear, and just lean into the bravery. And that's what really helped me with a lot of things. And I'm in a very good place right now, and I feel awesome. And I was not even nervous before this talk, where a year ago, I was shaking, you know? And so it's putting yourself also in these situations that are scary. And a lot of times, if we are in these scenarios where we feel like this imposter syndrome is sitting in, or we're a little bit nervous, well, maybe it's just because we haven't experienced it enough too. There's so many things. There's the social barriers, society, there's our deepest fears, our insecurities that are rooted in how we were raised, or what did your parents say to you growing up, or what did your coach say to you growing up. Or there's things where you're just like, I'm sitting last year on a panel with really impressive people who have way more experience than me. Of course I'm gonna be nervous, right? Yeah. So I think having this situational IQ and self-awareness is very helpful in helping identify what's going on with you in that moment, and to give yourself the tools and to figure out just how to get past it.
And I love that you mentioned childhood and maybe a teacher, maybe a parent, maybe somebody else. I wonder if you guys can reflect a little bit and share maybe a story, maybe a limiting belief that you had when you were growing up. I think it would be helpful for the audience also to hear. What was a limiting belief that you, maybe it wasn't true, but you believed in it, and it limited your actions, your success for a certain time? What did you do to overcome it?
Oh, I can answer that straight off. I think for me, when I think back, I grew up in I had all my siblings are female. I was always outspoken, very gregarious, tomboyish, ran up to strangers, spoke to everybody. And there was a point where that became less safe. So I'm 57, and I grew up at a time where in Britain, you had the National Front. I grew up in a multicultural, right-wing organizations. I grew up in a multicultural environment. And so I always remember myself being confident. And then I think what happened in my case, in terms of the limiting belief, even though I didn't consciously believe it, the subconscious is more dominant, all right? So what would happen, I'd go into spaces and feel the energy shift, right? Why? Because I was black. So a lot of what I had to confront was less actually about being a woman. I've always been very confident in myself as a woman. I've never been intimidated, by men. I will, even when I did judo, I was throwing 6-foot men. That wasn't it. What I had to counter and deal with and understand was why was I being treated differently. But in my case, it wasn't overt. That actually I prefer and makes it easier. It was very subtle. So the fact I turn up somewhere And my name is Joy Francis. I was a journalist. My original career was journalism. And I turn up to maybe interview someone quite senior somewhere out of London, in Scotland. And the secretary would come in, look around, go back in. I'm the only person in the waiting room. I'm expected. And yet, you can't be that journalist or that deputy editor or whatever. And it's like, hello. But after a while, do you see what I mean? Sometimes it wears you down. And then, then I had to be in a situation where I always had to name it. So I took that upon myself, but that's a lot of emotional labor. So for me, and like now, that's why I set up my own company. I thought, I am not. I need to create safe spaces for people and others I want to work with. And that's why I platform unheard stories. It's not untold stories, it's the stories we've been telling for millennia, and people are choosing not to hear. So I think that, what's really important about the imposter syndrome, do not believe it stifles you. It makes you stronger. It actually gives you a superpower because it makes you incredibly intuitive, being able to read a room. My emotional intelligence is incredibly high, and it enables me to be a good collaborator. Yeah? So even though, of course, I'd want it to be different, but I've channeled it in a way, and it's made me much more empathetic.
Anybody wants to add
I can go. So I share that I show up in rooms as Black, as a man, as a Muslim,
Ooh,
and introverted, being called special because I don't eat everything, I don't drink, and having to own that. I own it. I know that confidence for me comes from, my parents. My parents who are my heroes, who've always brought me up with the belief that I was created for a special purpose, regardless of how I show up. You have to believe as an individual that you are created for a special purpose. You have work to do. Because you have work to do, you will not know everything, and you're not meant to know everything. That's why you build community. That's why you have teams. That's why you show vulnerability. That's why you show empathy, to allow people that space to come in and support you. That's very important. I've shown up in spaces, started my presentation, and I've been told, wait. A room full of white men with gray hair. I know. I know what, wait a minute, who are you? I know where that is coming from. But you have to have the confidence. And what gives you the confidence, it's knowing that you made it to that space. You made it to that room. You made it to that event. The work that you did in getting there gives you ownership of that space. You have to take it. You have to own it. So how I've dealt with it is that voice back of my head, I was created for a special purpose.
Would you like to add something there?
My mic's not on. I don't think my mic's on.
Yeah, your mic's.
I'll jump in then. Why not?
You go ahead, Sam.
When you were talking, actually, what came to my mind as well is there's two sides to it. There's the side of the strength that you get, because I was thinking back to, maybe limiting beliefs where I wasn't smart enough. But I look at what me perceiving myself as not being smart enough gave me. I worked really, really hard. I probably stayed longer than other people in the office. I probably was more curious and asked a lot more questions than anybody else. I probably sought more perspectives from other people who had different experiences than I did than anybody else. And I probably was really humble, and which made me step aside sometimes and give other people the space to grow and to be their best, which helped me become a better leader because I had an insecurity in the back of my head where I wasn't smart enough. But I learned from that. But on the other side of that, the irony is, when we started talking about imposter syndrome, is now. And I was sharing when we were preparing for today that I have, in the last, I'm going to say, few months and year, have really, as I ask other people questions about themselves, asked myself those same questions. And I'd say that I have maybe more awareness of my limiting beliefs now, so maybe that's why I'm conscious of them. But I see, and one of the things that I was sharing is, I look back on some jobs that I wanted when I was younger. And there was one in particular, it was the event manager for Hope Volleyball. I didn't have any event management experience. I'd never done anything like that before in my life. And I went after that job so hard. I literally tracked down every single board member, had a conversation with them. I articulated, and I didn't have the experience, but I had relevant experience. I organized trips for friends. I brought people together, and I got the job. And I remember years later when we were backfilling my position, and we went through some of the resumes of people who'd previously applied, and I was looking at it, and I'm like, how did you pick me? Like, there was some rock stars in here. And Rob, who was the president at the time, said to me, you wanted it more than anybody else. But the reason that I mention that is because there was a job that I was really interested in about 6 months ago, and I caught myself. I didn't go after it like I had before, and I questioned myself why. And I started to recognize all of these limiting beliefs that I have now. And when you ask about overcoming it, I'm still trying to figure out how to overcome it, to be honest, and use some of the tools that I share with others around understanding your values, understanding your purpose, seeking out support from others, developing those networks. But for me, I actually have to unlearn some things that I've taught myself.
That's interesting.
I think the moment that the question was about the old belief you had, right? That's sort of like, where did this all start, right? So I used to be an athlete. I played volleyball in the US for many years at a pretty high level, and started at a young age. And so my life was constantly, as an athlete, you're just constantly criticized, right? By your coach. You were constantly working on your mentality, your health, your craft, your positioning, all these things, and that's just was ingrained in my brain that that's just how we do things. And of course, there's a great support system, and you have your teammates and all these things, but you're basically just sort of seasoned to take on critique at a very high level in terms of the volume of what you're taking, right? And I had coaches who were good coaches and coaches who were bad coaches, and I could talk about that for hours as well. But I think what a lot of athletes who don't make it that far, not on Olympic teams or professionally, they then have to leave the athletic world and they have to enter the workforce. And they completely lose their identity in a way. I went from feeling like an all-star to going into my resume writing class, and I had nothing to put on my resume. And other people were like, internships at Morgan Stanley, and I was like, volleyball coach, summer camp, And so going in, I knew I just sort of had to start from scratch, but then I went into the workforce where nobody actually really was very critical. Performance reviews were a little bit, they weren't that constructive. And there just wasn't this conversation being had where I needed feedback. I needed critical, constructive feedback in order to be better. And I didn't get that for a really long time. So I just sort of became just complacent and just did my best and just had to really lean onto myself of understanding, what is it I want to do, where do I want to go, and what do I need in order to get there? And with more experience and more age, I started asking for more. And I started telling my managers, I need feedback from you. And then when I got it, I could actually take it, I could do something. But I would still feel these moments where I didn't know what I was doing, right? But I learned very quickly to become resourceful. And that helped me with this whole imposter thing as well, where I was like, I'm not gonna have the answers to everything. No way. But I know who to go to for them. I will go to my team, and I will work with them, and I will get help. And if I don't know something, I'm gonna be open and honest about it. And everyone once you go somewhere or you work in a place where that's embraced, I'm in the agency space with a lot of creative thinkers, a lot of solution-oriented problem solving, and we're a tight crew. Agency people stick together. I don't know of other people who are at agencies. And so it was always really welcomed. And I really wish that that could be incorporated more. And you mentioned that a lot of companies and schools don't talk about these things. Well, I think that there's methods like that, open communication, different types of performance reviews, and just being able to establish those things at the ground level, at companies or in schools, it's just going to make a huge difference in our belief system overall, too.
Yeah. I just want to pick up on something that Sam said, and I think this is something we need to be aware of, because what happens when you have a limiting belief, and you don't, because more often than not, you don't know you've got them. So you're going around thinking everything's fine. But what strikes me, though, and it's just something to be aware of, is now we've got much more knowledge and great self-help and other books, psychological books about it. But what strikes me, there is a thing that comes with age, because I think a lot of the time you don't realize why you're overcompensating.
Yeah.
You know, and like working hard and everything else. And for me, it was like, I'm in control of everything. You know, and I sort of I was really good at holding spaces and everything else. The things that you see as a gift, but I think when you get to a point in your life, look forward to your 40s and 50s, people, where you actually start to look at things differently. Like, yeah, it's something I can do, but do I love doing it? Yeah. And when you start letting that go, all of a sudden you realize, that was in response to that. Whereas now I'm doing much more, there's a direct line to what I'm doing now, which is from a passion and a love that is more authentic. That was still you, but it was in response to something, a reaction to something. And that became a pattern. And so that's what struck me when you spoke. So a lot of us are going around not realizing that we're not fully living our own lives. I know it sounds a bit scary, but yeah, but it's important because it's going to make you who you really are. But it's when you choose to debut yourself, that's the question.
This is so good.
That's interesting.
Thank you so much, guys, for sharing. And getting back to what you mentioned, you guys share some of your stories. I personally come from a small town in Bulgaria. I grew up in the 90s. Very difficult times, first years of democracy. My parents did their very best. They were very loving. However, I come from a kind of a poor region. Me and my brother, we are always taught we don't have money, which in my mind was we're not good enough. You can have the nice clothes, you can go to a trip with your schoolmates, and my mom, maybe out of her love to make us be successful and work hard and ingrain these values, she will always give us tasks to do, and then she will evaluate. So, for example, hey kids, can you clean up the home? And I gotta tell you, I'm not a detailed guy when it comes to cleaning, right? But I'll do my very best. I'll clean 3 times. Then she comes home, and she'll say, what is this pot? What is this pot here? And then, subconsciously, I'll be like, even if I do my best, I'm not good enough. Yeah. And then I believe this bullshit story, and it's been keeping me in prison ever since I was maybe in my early 20s, and I started reading about these things and doing coaching, and then at some point, you start talking to people, and now I have a chance to talk to people like some of the most impactful people in the world. I have a podcast, I'm interviewing the founder of Reebok. Sam, you introduced me to the former president of Starbucks, unicorn founders, top-level executives. You talk to them, and you realize that they have the same beliefs. Oh my God, man, I'm struggling with this. I don't know what to do. And it's like, oh, it's not just me. Everybody is struggling with stuff. And the more you own it, the more you go back and say, I'm not gonna be the best in everything. I just gotta be me. Yeah. I gotta own my shit, and I'm gonna own the things that I'm really good at. But it's hard. Yeah. And sometimes, for me, I wanna hear you guys as well. Everybody's gonna have a minute to share, but for me, when I struggle with this, let's say I have to give a talk and everybody else is a CEO of a big company and there's 2,000 people, whatever. I'll be like, I gotta remind myself. So I have a success journal, as stupid as it sounds. And I'm gonna open and I'm gonna write 10 things that prove that I'm fucking amazing, right? And then I start writing stuff in the journal. I'm like, you know what? I'm actually pretty good. You know, I deserve to be on this stage. You know, I have something to give of value. But 1 minute per person, practical advice. What do you do when you have these feelings of insecurity? Let's start with the gentleman again.
Gratitude. I started a gratitude journal, I think about maybe 7 years ago. Because I went through a period in time where I had achieved and I was like, is this it? You know, not that I doubted myself, but I was thinking, what else is there? I had a coach and she introduced me to a gratitude journal. And every single day I write, the one thing that's consistent that I write every single day is, I'm grateful for health. I'm grateful for my health. I'm grateful for my family's health, because I know without it, I can't do anything. I literally cannot do anything. So, right, so get a journal, write good thoughts, bad thoughts. You'll eventually find your way, okay? That's my one takeaway. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I have a few in a moment that go through your head and through my head in moments, but basically, I always take a really deep breath. Breathing exercise actually work. For people who are like, no, they don't work, I don't need it. Like, go learn breathing exercises. It literally slows your heart rate. It makes such a difference. I always did, to overcome moments where I was feeling it and I was scared, be prepared. Prepare yourself. Do what you can. You know, if you feel like you don't know something or you're scared to present yourself, just prepare to the best that you can and be like, well, I did, and now I'm gonna be brave and I'm gonna go through this. And lean into it. Push yourself through these scenarios. That's where the growth is. Yeah. Just like you said, the growth is pushing yourself through those moments that make you sweat and that make you scared. And getting past that is a beautiful thing, and it feels great afterwards. Yeah. And you can be like, ah. And also, I just learned as an adult in my mid-30s now that like everything that's wrong in the world is due to human error. It's true. And I've learned that. And growing up, I never thought that, and now I know. And that's also made me feel really good. Like, think of the leaders in our world right now. How did the pandemic start? Well, I think I'm doing a pretty good job. I'm gonna do my best today, and those are my tips.
There you go.
Okay, like you, Nina, I think there's a range of different things. One, I have no shares in it. There's an app called Insight Timer. Highly recommended, so please check that out. You have some of the greatest thinkers, spiritual leaders, and others in the world. Courses on there, challenges on there. There's a community of like 1 million, and it really developed more during COVID. I'd recommend that. Develop a relationship with yourself. Make sure that you know who you are, and like, it's easier said than done, but a lot of us don't spend any quiet time with ourselves. So going for a walk, journaling every morning. I'd also recommend The Artist's Way. You do not have to be an artist to read it. That way you can take yourself out of your comfort zone. There's some really good tasks in there. Surround yourself with people who are not scared to be vulnerable. I realized I've been spent 30 years developing people, and then I found my own coach. Even people, there's someone you admire who's further along their journey than you, bribe them. I approached someone who, with muffins, and basically she gave me 4 sessions in the morning at 8 o'clock before she started work. This is like 15, 20 years ago, which were really invaluable. So ask for what you need. And I think that just be less hard on yourself and listen to your inner dialogue. You don't think it's going on, and avoid the word don't. I cannot, I don't want to. Affirm, say, I want to. Because you're sending mixed messages to your subconscious. Trust me, I've been practicing it, it works. But I think practice sharing with others, not just willy-nilly, but find someone or tools that you are consistent with. And that book, seriously, The Big Leap, I can't recommend it enough.
I'm just going to build off of what Joy said really quickly. Just get curious with yourself. Ask yourself why. And when you've answered that, ask yourself why again. And then just keep asking why. Because honestly, our thoughts are simply just that. They're thoughts. They're not reality. They're completely made up based off of our experiences, what we've learned from others, and just try to get super curious with yourself. And then if you can do that with some space and some practice, you can start doing what's called going to the balcony. So like you're observing down below versus getting on the dance floor and being really involved in it, and just keep questioning. As they say at 15 seconds, stay curious.